This happened back in August of 2013, out in the desert of northern New Mexico. It was one of those warm, still nights where the heat lingers even after the sun goes down, and the mesas stand like massive black shapes under a sky full of stars. The kind of night that feels endless, where time slows down and everything seems a little unreal. A mutual friend of ours, John, was throwing one last big party before heading back to university. His parents were out of town for a few weeks, and they owned a huge piece of land. Acres of farmland stretched out in every direction, with the San Juan River cutting through part of the property, and a massive mesa rising up to the south, watching over everything like a silent guardian. With no parents around and all that space, John decided to throw what he promised would be an unforgettable party. He went all out. He filled animal troughs with jungle juice, which he proudly called dank drank. He set up multiple DJs across the property, so music echoed through the fields and bounced off the canyon walls. He even paid one of his friends to stand guard at the cattle gate at the entrance, making sure only people he trusted were allowed in. It was supposed to be controlled chaos, but as you can probably guess, it didn't stay controlled for long. I went with my close friends, Jacob and Sean. Later on, we linked up with Alex, who was Sean's cousin, and Gabe, who everyone called Tank. Tank was a massive guy, about 6'4" and close to 280 pounds. That detail is important because it takes a lot to make someone like him look small or afraid. By the time the sun set, the place looked like a full-on festival, where cars were parked all over the fields. There had to be hundreds of people there. Music blasted from different directions, mixing together into one constant wall of sound. The air smelled like dust, beer, weed, and sweat. People were dancing, laughing, shouting, and just enjoying the night. It was one of those moments where everything feels perfect, like nothing could possibly go wrong. We drank, talked to strangers, laughed, and moved from group to group. It was the kind of night you wish could last forever. But Jacob couldn't relax. He kept glancing around nervously, muttering about how the cops were definitely going to show up. He always got paranoid at parties held way out in the middle of nowhere. We tried to calm him down, telling him we were on private property and that law enforcement couldn't just wander in like that. Unfortunately, Jacob turned out to be right. The guy working the gate got drunk. Then he got more drunk. Eventually, he passed out completely and left the gate wide open. By around 10 o'clock, the glow from the bonfires and floodlights was visible from miles away. Anyone driving nearby would have seen it. That's when we noticed headlights winding down the long dirt road leading to the property. At first, we thought more guests were arriving. Then the headlights flashed red and blue. Sheriffs, state police. The moment those lights came on, the party turned into pure chaos. Music cut out in some places, people screamed. Cars revved their engines. Dust clouds exploded into the air as people tried to leave all at once. You could hear officers shouting commands, dogs barking, and boots pounding the ground. It felt like the entire night shattered in seconds. We ran. There was no plan. Everyone just bolted in whatever direction they thought might get them away. Our group headed toward the river. Tank tried to push down a barbed wire fence so we could jump it. I followed right behind him, but the wire snapped back and ripped my pants wide open. Suddenly, I was sprinting through the desert in my boxers. Thank God it was summer. We dove into a thick patch of cottonwoods and brush near the river. It was so dense it felt like a cave, branches and leaves wrapping around us. We crouched low, barely breathing, hearts pounding so hard it felt like they might give us away. A second later, 2 other people crashed into the same hiding spot, scaring the hell out of us. They spoke mostly Spanish, but we managed to whisper for them to be quiet, warning them that the cops were nearby. From where we were hiding, we could hear officers yelling through the night. They shouted things like, "Come out, we know you're out there," and "If you're under 18, we'll call your parents." Flashlights swept through the trees, beams cutting just above our heads. Dogs barked somewhere close by, radios crackled, boots crunched through dirt and twigs. The adrenaline was overwhelming. My chest burned from running, and every sound felt amplified. Then we heard something behind us. At first, it was splashing in the river. Light at first, like someone wading through shallow water. I wasn't too concerned. I figured it was someone else trying to hide. But the splashing got louder, heavier. Whatever it was sounded big. Tank leaned in close and whispered that something was back there. I whispered back that it was probably a cow or something, and told him to stay quiet. But then came the panting. Slow, deep, heavy breaths. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound right. It sounded like something massive, out of breath. Sean's voice shook as he whispered that he wasn't staying there to get eaten and that he didn't care if he got arrested. Before anyone could decide what to do, a voice shouted from the top of the mesa behind us. "It's all clear over here. You don't need to search this area." The cops turned their lights toward the small overhang at the top of the mesa. One of them shouted back, sounding unsure but apparently convinced enough. They moved on. We stared at each other in disbelief. We recognized that voice. It was Ryan, an acquaintance who had climbed up there earlier to hide. Somehow, either through drunken confidence or pure instinct, he had pretended to be a cop. And it worked. He had just saved us. But our relief didn't last. The panting behind us got louder, closer. Branches cracked, water splashed harder. Whatever it was moving toward the tree line. We could feel the weight of it. That was it. Sean broke first. He shouted that he wasn't dying out there and took off running toward the mesa. We all followed, scrambling up rocks and cactus, tearing our hands and arms open as we climbed. Fear gave us strength we didn't know we had. When we reached the top, we could see the chaos below. Red and blue lights flashed across the fields. People were still running. Others were being detained. We took a moment to catch our breath, laughing in disbelief that we had escaped the cops. That's when something crossed the mesa in front of us. It moved so fast it barely registered. It was maybe 15 yards away, and it crossed our view in a second or two. The only light came from the moon, but it was enough to see its shape. It was huge, broad shoulders, long arms, running upright on two legs. It looked like a linebacker made of shadow. Tank, who was massive, looked small in comparison. That alone was enough to freeze us. None of us spoke. We just stood there, listening, as its footsteps faded into the open desert. Ryan laughed nervously and joked that it was Bigfoot. Nobody responded. The air felt heavy, like everything around us was holding its breath. We didn't wait around. We climbed down the other side of the mesa as fast as we could, slipping on loose dirt, desperate to get away from that place. At the bottom, we regrouped and said goodbye to Ryan and the others. Our trucks were still back at John's property. To the east and northeast were the roads, but that's where the cops were. The only option was to head north, looping around toward the western side of the property. To do that, we had to climb another hill, covered in cottonwoods, sagebrush, and thick vegetation. It was eerily quiet. Then we heard laughter, high-pitched, childlike, whispering. It sounded like a group of girls giggling just ahead of us at the top of the hill. We froze. Sean yelled out, demanding to know who was up there and telling them to stop messing with us. No response. Then the laughter came again, softer, closer. It sounded like it was circling us. We shined our phone lights up the hill but saw nothing but shadows. Then the giggling came one last time. Right at the edge of the light. I swear I saw figures crouched behind the brush. That was enough. We turned and ran, taking the long way north through the dark desert until we were far away from the river, the mesa, and whatever else was out there. Later that night, we heard another party had started miles away, and we went there trying to salvage the night. But not long after, we learned that one of John's closest friends, Larry, had crashed his car leaving the first party. He didn't survive. That night stayed with me, not just because of what we saw, but because of how quickly everything changed. We went out there just to have fun. By the end of the night, someone was gone forever, and we had seen things we still can't explain. Even now, when I'm near those mesas at night, I feel that same chill, like the desert remembers. I'm still not sure what exactly happened that night, or if I'll ever have a clear answer, but the experience has stayed with all of us ever since. We live in a very rural part of northeastern Alabama, not far from the Appalachian foothills. Our family owns a large piece of land, about 467 acres, most of it woods, fields, and hills. My grandparents bought this land back in the early 1980s, and most of us have grown up here. It's the kind of place where you can walk for hours without seeing another house, where the nights are dark and quiet, and where you learn early on how to read the land and listen to your instincts. Our property sits down inside a hollow, with tall mountains surrounding us on every side. It almost feels like the land folds in on itself, creating a natural bowl. For most of my life, it's been peaceful. You hear coyotes sometimes, owls at night, and the usual sounds of deer moving through the woods. Recently, though, things have started to change. Someone bought one of the mountains nearby and turned it into an ATV park. Since then, wildlife has been pushed deeper into our land. We've noticed more deer than usual, coyotes moving closer to the house, and a general feeling that the woods aren't as quiet as they used to be. On the night of November 1st, my siblings decided to take the Polaris Ranger out for a ride around the property. This wasn't unusual. We've done it countless times, especially at night. The Ranger has strong lights, and everyone knows the trails well. There are 3 of them, the oldest, the middle one, and the youngest. They left a little after 10:30 p.m., planning to make a few loops around the land before heading back home. There's a small bridge over a creek near the start of the loop. That bridge is important to us. It's one of those landmarks that tells you you're close to home. No matter where you are on the property, once you cross that bridge, you know you're almost back. They crossed it and continued on, riding through familiar paths and open fields. At first, everything felt normal. After about 15 minutes, the oldest sibling started to feel something was off. She later told me it wasn't fear exactly, more like a deep, sinking feeling in her chest, a sense of dread that came out of nowhere. She didn't say anything, though. She didn't want to scare the younger 2, and she thought maybe she was just overthinking things. They kept riding. The woods felt quiet in a strange way. Not peaceful quiet, but empty. No cows in the fields, no deer crossing the trails, no sounds beyond the hum of the engine and the wind moving through the trees. Around 10:45 or so, they noticed something on the ground along the trail. It looked out of place, but it was hard to tell what it was in the dark. They slowed down for a moment, and that's when the second oldest sibling felt the same sinking dread. Still, he didn't say anything. The oldest said something like, "Don't stop, just keep driving. We'll look at it in the morning." So they did. They kept looping the property, trying to shake the feeling, but it didn't go away. If anything, it grew heavier. Around 11:15, they stopped again, just briefly, because one of them got a text from our mom. As the Ranger idled, The middle sibling looked out across one of the open fields. That's when he saw it. He described it as a large creature, almost 6 feet tall. It had 4 legs, but it didn't move like an animal. It was standing upright in a way that reminded him of a human, but it clearly wasn't one. He said it was positioned across the field, not close, but close enough that he could make out its shape. For a moment, they locked eyes. He couldn't describe its face clearly, only that it felt like it was looking directly at him, aware of them. He didn't say a word. He just floored the gas. The ranger took off, speeding back toward home. Still, none of them spoke. Fear settled in silently, heavy and thick. As they approached the bridge near the entrance to the property, the youngest sibling started crying. Full-on panic, begging to go home. That's when the fear finally broke through into words, even if nothing specific was said. There's a gate at the entrance that has to be opened and closed every time someone comes or goes. The oldest sibling got out to open it. She told me later that standing there, alone in the dark, she felt absolutely certain that if she looked up, if she lifted her head or turned around, she would not survive whatever she saw. She kept her eyes down, opened the gate as fast as she could, jumped back into the ranger, and they sped toward the house. They made it home without seeing anything else, but they were not okay. When they came inside, all 3 of them looked wrong. Their pupils were blown so wide you couldn't even see the color of their eyes. They were shaking, quiet. It took a while before they could even talk about what had happened. There were other details that made the whole thing even more unsettling. We have a porch dog who usually follows them whenever they ride around the property. That night, he refused to go. He stayed behind, wouldn't move, no matter how much they called him. We also have cattle spread across the land, but they didn't see a single one that night. No movement, no noise, nothing. They mentioned that while they were riding, there was a smell of smoke in the air, even though nothing was burning. The wind was moving strangely, and at one point the song Pumped Up Kicks came on. The whistling in the song made everything feel worse. They said that on the ride back, it felt like they weren't just scared, but hunted. Like something was right there with them, matching their movement, waiting for them to stop. Since that night, we've gone back to the area in daylight. Nothing looks out of place, no tracks, no damage, no signs of anything unusual. The land looks exactly the same as it always has, but that doesn't make the experience go away. What sticks with me the most is that all 3 of them felt it. Not just fear, but the same kind of fear. The kind that doesn't come from imagination, but from something deeper, something instinctual. The kind of fear that tells you to run without stopping, without questioning it. I don't know if it was an animal behaving strangely, something psychological, or something we don't have a name for. I don't know if it was a cryptid or just the land reminding us that we don't control it the way we think we do. All I know is that whatever they felt that night was real to them, and it changed the way we all look at the woods around our home. Even now, when the wind moves through the hollow at night, or the woods fall into that same unnatural silence, I think about that ride. I think about how close they felt to not making it home. And I listen a little more carefully than I used to, because sometimes the land watches back. Clearly, but still young enough that the world felt larger, stranger, and far more mysterious than it does now. My family used to take regular road trips from Johannesburg down to Cape Town. It was a long drive, the kind that felt endless to a child. Most of the time I slept through large portions of it, waking up only when the car stopped for fuel or food, or when the scenery changed enough to catch my attention. That particular trip, though, was different. It was the first time I felt truly aware of the journey itself, of the distance, the isolation, and the quiet stretches of road that seemed to go on forever. We were driving through the Karoo, a vast semi-desert region that feels completely removed from the rest of the world. The land out there is dry and flat, stretching endlessly under a massive sky. Even during the day, it can feel empty and unsettling, but at night it becomes something else entirely. The darkness settles in deep, swallowing everything beyond the reach of your headlights. Towns are few and far between, and when you do come across one, it often feels like you've stepped into a place that time forgot. We arrived at one of these towns late in the evening, which was pretty normal for our family. My parents preferred to drive as far as possible before stopping, especially when the roads were quiet and clear. By the time we pulled into the motel, I remember feeling exhausted and disoriented, half asleep and half awake. The town itself was almost completely silent. There were no other cars moving, no people walking around, and no lights beyond the motel and a few dim street lamps. The motel looked old, even to my young eyes. It wasn't falling apart exactly, but it had that tired look, like it had seen better decades and never really recovered. The paint was faded, the sign flickered slightly, and the building seemed to sit there under the stars like it didn't quite belong to the present. We were all hungry, and my parents went to speak to the owner. The kitchen was already closed for the night, which disappointed us. But the owner said his wife had cooked something earlier and we were welcome to have that instead. He smiled when he said it, a polite but oddly unreadable expression that made me uneasy without knowing why. He told us the dish was called muis stert. At the time, I didn't really understand Afrikaans well enough to question it. Later, I learned that muis means mouse and stert means tail, although tert can also mean tart. Even now, I'm not entirely sure which one he meant, but at the time, none of us really questioned it. We were tired, hungry, and trusted the adults to know what they were doing. The food was placed in front of us, and I remember staring at it for a long moment before eating. It was a stew of some kind, dark and thick, with small pieces of meat that didn't look like anything I recognized. I remember the taste being strong and unfamiliar. No one said much while we ate. My parents tried to act normal. But there was a strange quiet around the table, like everyone was thinking the same unspoken thought and didn't want to say it out loud. Even now, I sometimes wonder if we actually ate mouse tails, or if that's just how my memory has twisted the experience over time. Either way, the feeling I had while eating that meal has never left me. It felt wrong somehow, like we were doing something we shouldn't have been doing, even though nothing openly bad was happening. After dinner, we were shown to our room. The hallway leading to it felt narrow and dimly lit, and the air inside the building felt stale, like it hadn't been properly aired out in years. The door creaked loudly when it opened, and the sound echoed in a way that made me flinch. The room itself was worse. It was filled with old paintings that immediately caught my attention. They lined the walls, and every one of them seemed to depict children. Pale children with gaunt faces, oversized eyes, and expressions that were hard to describe. They weren't smiling exactly, but they weren't frowning either. Their faces were blank, hollow, and unsettling. Even at 8 years old, I knew there was something deeply wrong about them. There was also an old crib in the corner of the room, the kind that looked like it belonged in another century. The wood was dark and worn, and it made a soft creaking noise whenever someone moved, even slightly. I remember staring at it and feeling like it didn't belong there at all. None of us were babies. There was no reason for a crib to be in that room, and yet there it was, taking up space like it was waiting for something. Nothing overtly supernatural happened that night, and no shadows moved on their own. No voices whispered in the dark. No doors slammed shut. And yet the sense of dread was overwhelming. It settled over all of us the moment we stepped into that room, thick and heavy, like the air itself had weight. My siblings were just as scared as I was. We didn't even need to say anything to each other. We could feel it. My parents tried to stay calm, but I could tell they were unsettled too. Eventually, without much discussion, all four of us ended up crammed into one double bed. No one suggested it outright. It just happened, like we all knew that separating would somehow make things worse. We lay there in the dark, barely moving, listening to the sounds of the building. Every small noise felt amplified. The creak of the crib, the faint hum of electricity, the distant wind outside. I don't remember sleeping much, if at all. It felt like we were just waiting for the night to end, holding our breath until morning came. As soon as the sun started to rise, we left. We didn't linger, we didn't have breakfast. We packed up and got back on the road as quickly as possible. The relief I felt when we drove away from that motel was intense, like escaping something I couldn't fully understand. What makes this memory so strange is how clearly it has stayed with me for nearly 40 years. I can still picture the paintings. I can still remember the taste of the food. I can still feel that sense of dread sitting heavy in my chest. And yet, sometimes I wonder if the motel was even real at all. The Karoo is full of empty towns and forgotten places. It's entirely possible that the motel has long since disappeared, reclaimed by time and dust. But part of me wonders if it ever truly existed in the way I remember it, or if it was one of those places that only appear for a moment, leaving behind nothing but an uneasy memory. All I know is that something about that night marked me. It taught me that fear doesn't always come from obvious danger. Sometimes it comes from atmosphere, from silence, from places that feel wrong without giving you a clear reason why. And sometimes those places stay with you forever, long after the road has carried you far away. I was very young when my parents divorced, probably around 5 years old, maybe even a little younger. My memories from that time are hazy in places, like old photographs left too long in the sun. But there are certain moments that remain painfully clear, as if they've been etched into my mind and refuse to fade, no matter how many years pass. After the divorce, my mom moved us into a small beach house in a quiet coastal town. It was the same town where my dad had spent most of his teenage years, and it just so happened to be only one street over from my Oma and Opa's house. That alone made the place feel layered with history, even to me as a child. It was a town full of stories, memories stacked on top of each other like sediment, and my dad knew it intimately. He had played street hockey on the very road my mom moved us onto. He knew where the fish gathered near the shore, which adults were friendly and which ones weren't, and which parts of the surrounding woods held the most interesting secrets. To him, it was familiar ground. To me, it felt like stepping into a half-forgotten world that existed just beyond the edges of everyday life. One day, when I was still very small, my dad took me up the street and into the woods to show me some of the places he remembered from his own childhood. The woods weren't especially dense, but they felt deep. Trees stood close together, their branches weaving overhead, and the ground was soft with needles, leaves, and old growth that had been building up for decades. Sunlight filtered through in broken patches, and everything felt quieter there, like the forest was holding its breath. As we walked, my dad told me stories about the things he used to do there, where he and his friends would hide, where they'd build forts, where they'd dare each other to go late in the evening. He seemed relaxed, almost nostalgic, like revisiting those places brought him comfort. I trusted him completely, so I never questioned where we were going. Eventually, he led me to a clearing, and that's when I saw it. He called it the dollhouse playground. At first glance, it didn't make sense. Scattered around the clearing were what looked like dollhouses, but not the kind I was familiar with. These weren't plastic, brightly colored toys like Barbie houses. These were wooden, weathered, and heavy-looking. They reminded me more of birdhouses, except much larger and far more detailed. Each one seemed to be anchored into the ground somehow, or as if it had a foundation. They weren't just placed there casually. They belonged there. The wood was worn smooth in places, darkened by age and exposure to the elements. Some of the little structures had tiny windows. Others had doors that looked like they might once have opened. A few leaned slightly, as if the ground beneath them had shifted over time. Even at that age, I could tell they were old. My dad said he remembered them from when he was a kid, which meant they'd been there for decades. I remember feeling confused more than scared. I didn't understand why these dollhouses were there, or who had built them, or why they were left to decay in the middle of the woods. My dad didn't seem alarmed by them. He spoke about them casually, like they were just another strange but harmless feature of the landscape. To him, they were a curiosity from childhood. To me, they felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. We didn't stay long. I don't remember touching them or going inside any of them. I just remember standing there looking at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then we left, walking back through the woods toward the street, and life continued as normal. Except it didn't really. As I got older, those dollhouses stayed with me. The memory of them felt different from other childhood memories. It was sharper, more vivid, and carried a strange emotional weight. When I was a little older, maybe 7 or 8, I started trying to find them again. I assumed they'd still be there, waiting in the woods just like before. I went back alone at first, retracing what I thought was the same path. When that didn't work, I enlisted the help of other neighborhood kids. We treated it like an expedition, convinced we'd uncover something amazing if we just looked hard enough. We searched the woods again and again, walking farther than we were probably supposed to, but we never found them. No matter where we looked, there was no clearing, no wooden structures, no sign that anything like that had ever existed there at all. Years passed, and eventually I stopped searching. Life moved on, as it always does, but the memory never fully left me. About a decade ago, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked my dad about it. I brought up the dollhouse playground, expecting him to laugh and say, "Oh yeah, I remember that place." Instead, he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He had no idea what I was talking about. At first, I thought he was joking. I described it in detail, reminding him of how he'd taken me there, how he'd said he remembered it from his own childhood. But the more I talked, the more confused he looked. He genuinely didn't remember any dollhouses in the woods, not from his childhood and not from when he took me there. That conversation unsettled me more than I expected. If it was just my imagination, why did the memory feel so real? And if my dad truly didn't remember it, then where did it come from? That wasn't the only strange memory tied to that town. Both my brother and I have memories of a large garden behind our preschool. This wasn't a small playground or a patch of grass. It was a full garden, beautiful and slightly overgrown, like something you'd find in a city park that hadn't been maintained properly in years. There was a large sundial made of pink granite, the kind of stone that was local to that area. There was also a natural spring and winding paths that felt like they led somewhere important. What makes this memory especially strange is that the garden was only sometimes there. It wasn't consistent. And after one of the teachers at the preschool died while we were still attending, the garden seemed to disappear entirely, not slowly fade or get redeveloped. It was just gone. Years later, my brother and I talked about it one night, almost in passing. We both expected the other to dismiss it as a false memory. Instead, we realized we remembered the same things. The sundial, the spring, the feeling of the place. Our memories lined up in eerie detail. When we asked others about it, no one knew what we were talking about. These are just a few examples of the strange memories tied to that town. There are more, smaller moments that don't quite fit. Places that feel like they existed once but no longer do. Events that seem to have slipped through the cracks of time. Maybe it really is just overactive childhood imagination. Maybe memories shift and blend as we grow older, turning ordinary places into something more mysterious in hindsight. But what gives me pause is the sheer number of these memories, and the fact that my brother shares so many of them. It feels like too much to be coincidence. Too many places that existed and then vanished. Too many things remembered clearly by children and dismissed or forgotten entirely by adults. I don't claim to have answers. I don't even know what kind of answers I'd accept. All I know is that something about that town feels unfinished. Like there are parts of it that don't fully belong to the world we see now. And even after all these years, when I think about the woods, the dollhouses, or that vanished garden, I feel the same quiet unease I felt as a child. Whatever was going on there, whether it was imagination, memory, or something else entirely, it left its mark. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd found the dollhouse playground again. Or if some places are meant to disappear the moment you stop looking at them. I am an 18-year-old guy living in Gatineau, Canada. It is a quiet city, calm for the most part, sitting right beside Ottawa on the Quebec side. I grew up speaking French, so English has never been my first language, but what happened to me does not depend on language. Fear doesn't need translation. This happened about 2 months ago, and even now, almost every night, my mind drifts back to it without warning. Sometimes it happens while I am trying to sleep. Other times it comes back while I'm driving alone, when the road is empty and the streetlights stretch out in long, quiet lines ahead of me. That night started normally. I had spent the evening at my girlfriend's place. Nothing unusual, no arguments, no tension, just another calm weekday night together. She lives about 25 minutes away from me by car. I left her place around 1:30 in the morning. Because it was a weekday, the roads were completely empty. No traffic, no people walking, no noise. The kind of silence that feels heavier late at night, when even familiar streets seem different. I remember driving with the radio off, just listening to the sound of the engine and the tires against the road. I wasn't tired. I wasn't distracted. I was alert, relaxed, and focused on getting home. I was about 10 minutes away from my place when I turned onto Rue Saint-Louis. It's a wide road, 2 lanes on each side, running alongside a river. During the day, it's busy enough. At night, especially that late, it feels isolated. There aren't many streetlights there. Your headlights do most of the work, cutting a narrow path through the darkness ahead. The river runs quietly to the side, invisible but present, like something watching without making a sound. I reached an intersection where there's a convenience store and a McDonald's. I slowed, made the turn, and continued forward. Maybe 100 meters later, something appeared in my headlights. At first, it was just a shape, a dark silhouette moving strangely in the middle of the road. It didn't make sense right away. My brain struggled to register what I was seeing. Then I realized it was running, not running straight, zigzagging, back and forth across the road, as if it didn't know where it wanted to go, or as if it was trying to get someone's attention. My first thought was that it had to be someone drunk or high. No normal person runs like that in the middle of an empty road at that hour. As I got closer, the shape sharpened in my headlights. It was a young woman, probably early to mid-20s. She was waving her arms wildly, stepping into the beam of my lights, almost throwing herself into view. She looked desperate, and instantly, my thoughts went somewhere dark. I thought about all the stories you hear, all the warnings, the ones where someone pretends to need help, the ones where stopping your car is the last decision you ever make. My heart started beating faster. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I decided I wasn't going to stop. I slowed slightly, enough to pass safely, but I kept going. As I drove by her, it took less than a second for me to see her face clearly. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't acting. She looked terrified. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, and her expression wasn't aggressive or fake. It was raw panic. The kind you don't see unless something is very, very wrong. I passed her. 1 second, maybe 2. Then guilt hit me hard. I slammed on the brakes. Before I could think it through, I made a U-turn. My heart was pounding so loud, it felt like it was shaking my chest. I told myself I couldn't just leave someone like that in the road. I stopped about 7 meters away from her and slowly cracked my window open. Just a little. Enough to talk, not enough to put myself in danger. I didn't even get the chance to say anything. She turned around and ran straight at my car. Pure panic took over. I rolled my window back up instantly. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. She grabbed the rear passenger door handle behind me and tried to open it. Once, twice, again and again. The doors were locked. Through the glass, now I could hear her screaming. Not angry, not threatening, just desperate. "Call the police, call the police." Her voice cracked as she shouted it, over and over. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My fingers felt numb. While it was ringing, I lowered my window just a few centimeters and spoke quickly. Okay, calm down. I'm calling the police. You're safe." Something about those words changed her. She stopped pulling at the door. She stepped back. Her shoulders dropped. The panic didn't disappear, but it softened into something broken and exhausted. She wasn't aggressive anymore. She wasn't erratic. She looked like someone who had been running from something for far too long. She told me she was going to walk back toward the convenience store and McDonald's I had just passed about 100 meters away. Then she turned and started walking. I stayed in my car and followed her slowly, barely moving, maybe 2 kilometers per hour. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, explaining everything as clearly as I could. A young woman, running in the middle of the road, screaming for someone to call the police, clearly distressed, but not intoxicated. The dispatcher asked questions. I answered them automatically, my eyes never leaving her. When we reached the convenience store, both the store and the McDonald's were closed. The lights were off. The parking lot was empty. There was no one else around. Just her and me, standing under the harsh white glow of gas station lights that made everything feel exposed and unreal. She leaned against the wall and started crying. Not quietly, not politely. She cried like someone whose body couldn't hold everything inside anymore. For the first time, I could really see her. That's when I noticed her hands. They were covered in blood, not smeared, not splashed, soaked. I had never seen that much blood in my life. My heart started pounding so hard, I felt dizzy. I swallowed and asked quietly, barely trusting my own voice. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She shook her head. "No." My mouth went dry. "Is that your blood?" She looked down at her hands. Then she said, very calmly, "No." My mind went blank. If it wasn't her blood, then whose was it? I drove home that night on autopilot. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, and I don't remember most of the streets between the convenience store and my apartment. I just remember the silence. No music, no phone calls. Just the sound of my engine and my own breathing, way too loud in my ears. When I finally parked, I sat in the car for a long time before going inside. I kept replaying her words in my head. "I'm so ashamed of what I did. They will never forgive me." I tried to convince myself that I had just helped someone who was attacked, that maybe she escaped a violent situation, that the blood belonged to someone who hurt her, that the reason she didn't call the police herself was panic, shock, fear, all normal things. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. If she had escaped from danger, why was she running into the road instead of toward buildings? Why didn't she scream for help at the convenience store before? Why did she grab my car like that instead of knocking or speaking through the window? And most of all, why did her panic stop so suddenly when I said I was calling the police? That detail bothered me more than anything else. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hands. Not just bloody, but soaked. It wasn't a few stains. It wasn't smears. It was the kind of blood you see in movies after something truly violent has happened. The next day, I checked the local news. Nothing. I checked again the next day, still nothing. No assaults, no murders, no accidents, no missing persons, no police statements, no social media posts. Nothing that even remotely matched what I had witnessed. After a week, I started asking myself if the police would call me back. They had my name, my number. They knew I was involved. They never did. That was when the doubt really set in. I started questioning my own memory. Maybe the blood wasn't as bad as I thought. Maybe she said something different. Maybe I misunderstood her words because of the stress. But every time I tried to soften it, my body reacted the same way. Tight chest, cold hands, that heavy feeling in my stomach. A month passed, then two, still nothing. One night I drove past the same road again. Rue Saint-Louis, same stretch along the river, same poor lighting, same silence. I slowed down without realizing it. I didn't see anyone, no woman, no movement, just empty asphalt and my headlights cutting through the dark. But I felt it again, that same pressure in the air, that same feeling like something terrible had happened there and the place itself hadn't let it go. I didn't stop. I kept driving. Since that night, I've replayed the encounter hundreds of times. And one thought keeps coming back, no matter how much I try to ignore it. What if she wasn't running toward help? What if she was running away from what she had done? Her words weren't fear, they were shame. They will never forgive me, not they hurt me, not they're after me. Forgiveness implies guilt. Sometimes I wonder if I interrupted something worse, if stopping made the situation end differently than it would have otherwise. Other times I wonder if I helped someone escape consequences they deserved. And that's the part that keeps me awake. Because if she was a victim, then I did the right thing. But if she wasn't, then I was the last stranger she needed to disappear into the night. No answers, no closure, just a memory that refuses to fade. And the scariest part isn't the blood or the screaming or the silence afterward. It's knowing that somewhere out there a story ended that night, and I'll never know how. They lived in a wide farmland area where everything was spread far apart. Each farm had only one house, owned by the landowner, and the next house was always far away. Sometimes the distance between one home and the next was more than a kilometer, sometimes even a little more than that. At night, the land would turn completely quiet. No traffic sounds, no city noise, just open fields, canals, and the occasional wind moving through crops. Everyone in the area knew each other. People grew up together, worked the same land, attended the same weddings, funerals, and festivals. My uncle had lived there his entire life, and through family connections and years of shared history, he was close to many people in nearby farms. One of them was a man I'll call MM, lived on a neighboring farm. Technically, they were distant relatives through the family tree, but more than that, they were good friends. They spent a lot of time together, especially in the evenings. One thing that bonded them strongly was drinking. They drank together often, but M was different. My uncle could drink, sure, but M was on another level entirely. He was younger than my uncle, yet his tolerance was unbelievable. He drank almost every day. Sometimes he would disappear for hours or even an entire night, passed out somewhere near the fields or roads. His family had tried everything over the years, but eventually they stopped trying. They had accepted that this was who he was. One day, M didn't come home. At first, no one thought much of it. It wasn't unusual for him to disappear for a night or two. People assumed he had passed out somewhere again. His family waited. Then they waited longer. Days passed. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. That's when concern turned into fear. The villagers started searching. They checked nearby farms, dirt roads, fields, and canal banks. Eventually, someone found him. His body was lying in a canal beside the highway. He was badly damaged. The condition of his body made it clear that he had been there for several days. The most likely explanation was that he had been hit by a vehicle on the highway, thrown off the road, and had fallen into the canal. No one had noticed him for days. It was a terrible death. The entire area went quiet after that. Funerals in small villages always feel heavier. Everyone knew him. Everyone remembered him walking drunk along the roads, laughing loudly, waving at people as they passed. And after his death, life slowly returned to normal, but his absence was felt. Before M died, something small but important had happened. A few months earlier, my uncle and M had gone shopping together. They had bought 2 identical shirts. The shirts were expensive by local standards, something you didn't wear casually. They were meant for weddings, special occasions, celebrations. My uncle took one. M took the other. After M's death, the shirt stayed folded away. Months passed. Winter came. One day, my uncle had to attend a wedding in a distant area. It was far enough that he needed to travel late into the night to return home. When he got dressed, he chose that shirt. It felt right. It reminded him of old times. Maybe in some quiet way, it felt like carrying a piece of his friend with him. The wedding ended late. Now, by the time my uncle was returning, the night had fully settled in. He got off near the highway, the same highway that ran past their farmland. From there, he had to walk home. This was normal for him. The walk was long, somewhere between 3 to 5 kilometers, depending on the path he took. There were no houses nearby, no streetlights, only moonlight, open fields, and silence. He had done this walk many times in his life. Even at night, it didn't scare him. It was just part of living there. Along the way, he had to cross a bridge over a canal. The bridge sat at an intersection where the road met the water, surrounded by farmland on all sides. As he stepped onto the bridge, something happened. He heard a laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't distant. It was close, too close. He stopped walking. At first, he thought maybe someone else was nearby. Maybe another farmer. Maybe someone heading home late, just like him. But when he looked around, there was no one else on the road. Then he saw him. M was standing there, not lying down, not injured, standing. He looked at my uncle and smiled, and then he spoke. "Oh, so you're wearing our shirt." My uncle froze. Everything inside him went cold. His legs felt weak, his chest tightened. He didn't try to speak, he didn't ask questions. He didn't try to understand what he was seeing. He just ran. He ran as fast as his body would allow. He didn't look back. He didn't stop. He ran through the fields, across dirt paths, past intersections driven only by pure fear. He ran for kilometers without slowing down. By the time he reached home, he was soaked in sweat. His clothes clung to his body. He was breathing so hard it sounded like he might collapse. His family rushed toward him, asking what had happened, asking why he looked like he had seen death itself. He didn't answer. Without saying a single word, he grabbed the shirt he was wearing, tore it off his body, and threw it into the fire. Only after he watched it burn did he finally speak. He told them everything. And here's the part that made it worse. Later, other members of M's family claimed they had seen him too. Always on the same bridge, always at night, standing there, watching, waiting. The bridge is still there, and to this day, people avoid crossing it after dark. This story is true, and even now, years later, I sometimes wish it wasn't. Back then, I was a freshman in high school. I was young, dumb, and still at that age where sneaking out felt exciting instead of dangerous. That night, I was staying over at a friend's house. Everything was normal at first. We had snacks, watched dumb videos, talked about school and people we hated, the usual stuff. But at some point in the night, I got a text from two friends I'll call T and B. They were nearby and wanted to meet up. I knew I wasn't supposed to leave the house, but that only made the idea more tempting. It felt harmless. Just a short walk, a little rebellion, then back before anyone noticed. So I waited until the house was quiet, slipped on my shoes, and climbed out. The air was cold in that sharp October way, where you can smell fallen leaves and feel winter creeping closer. The streets were quiet, empty, and dark. I met up with T and B not long after. B was driving, and right away, I noticed she was on her phone more than she was watching the road. I told her to put it down. She laughed it off. I told her again, louder this time, and she rolled her eyes. I remember feeling annoyed but not scared. Not yet. Then it happened. She clipped a truck. It wasn't a massive crash, but it was loud enough to make my stomach drop. Metal scraping metal, a sudden jolt. Everything stopped for half a second, and then panic took over. B froze, then screamed, then slammed the gas. She took off. I yelled at her to stop, but she didn't listen. She blew through red lights like they didn't exist. Her hands shaking on the wheel, breathing fast, barely looking where she was going. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might break through my chest. I remember thinking that we were going to die, not even from the crash, but from what she was doing afterward. Eventually, she stopped near T's house. The car was quiet, except for B crying and hyperventilating. T didn't stick around. He bolted for his house the moment the car stopped, leaving me alone with B in the dark street. She kept pacing around the car, freaking out over the damage, talking about her parents, the police, everything spiraling at once. For context, I was the only guy there with her. I didn't feel comfortable leaving her alone in that state, so we decided to walk back to T's house together. The walk took around 20 minutes. Neither of us talked much. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind that sick, shaky feeling in your stomach. When we got back, things felt awkward. We regrouped for a bit, tried to act normal, but the night was already ruined. After a short while, I walked B back to her car so she could leave. She drove off slowly this time, headlights disappearing down the road. That's when I started the walk back to my friend's house. It was around 2 a.m. The neighborhood was dead quiet. No cars, no people. Just streetlights buzzing softly and houses sitting dark and empty. As I walked, my mind replayed everything that had happened. The crash, the panic, how stupid we'd all been. I kept thinking about how close things came to going really wrong. That's when I heard it, crying. At first, I thought I imagined it. I stopped walking and listened. It was soft, but real, a woman's voice. Crying in a way that sounded broken, like something had snapped inside her. Up ahead, under a streetlight, I saw her. She was sitting against a brick wall, curled in on herself. Her black hair completely covered her face. I couldn't see her eyes. I couldn't see her expression. Her body was folded in a way that didn't look comfortable or natural, like she had collapsed instead of sat down. Everything about it felt wrong. I didn't stop. I didn't ask if she was okay. I didn't slow down. Every instinct in my body told me to keep moving. I pretended not to notice her at all. As soon as I passed, something in me snapped, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could, shouting, "Fuck no," without even thinking about it. Fear took over completely. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, fast ones matching my pace. I didn't look back right away because I was terrified of what I might see. When I finally did glance back, there was nothing. Just darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached my friend's house. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I tried climbing through the window, struggling to get it open, my heart pounding louder than my thoughts. That's when I noticed the pickup truck. It was moving slowly down the street, creeping past each house one by one. Too slow, like it was looking for something or someone. It stopped near the house across the street, then rolled forward again. I froze. I stayed low, barely breathing, watching as it moved closer. It paused near my friend's house for a moment that felt endless. Then it kept going. I waited until it was gone before pulling myself inside. Once I was in, I locked everything. Doors, windows. I told my friends what happened, my words tumbling out fast and messy. I don't know if they fully believed me. Maybe they thought I was just shaken up from the night. Maybe they thought I imagined it. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. Even now, when I walk alone at night, I think about that woman under the streetlight, about the way her body was folded, about the sound of crying in an empty street, and I wonder what would have happened if I stopped. I don't think I want to know. I never believed in things like this before. I was always the kind of person who needed logic, something solid to explain what I was seeing. I'm not someone who jumps straight to ghosts or spirits, but when something happens once, you can try to brush it off. When it happens twice and in almost the same way, it stops feeling like an accident. It starts to feel like something is watching you, waiting, learning your routines. That's when the fear really sinks in. The first time it happened was in December of 2025. It was cold outside, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and makes the air feel heavy. My husband had stepped outside to smoke like he often did in the evenings. I stayed inside for a moment, picking up a few things and getting ready to join him. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of our dog moving around and the faint hum of the heater working overtime. As I gathered my things, I suddenly felt this strange sensation. It wasn't a sound or a sight at first. It was more like a pressure in my chest, a tight feeling that made me stop what I was doing. I don't know why, but I looked up toward the door that leads outside. That's when I saw my husband. He was sitting right in front of the door, facing inside. At first, nothing seemed wrong. I assumed he had dragged a chair over and sat down there for some reason. He does things like that sometimes without thinking much about it. But then I noticed his face more clearly, and something felt off. He was smiling, but not the kind of smile I knew. It wasn't warm or casual, it didn't reach his eyes, it was stiff. He almost stretched like he was forcing it. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, not really focused on anything I could see. For a second, I thought maybe he was smiling at our dog, who was nearby. That would have made sense, but the longer I looked, the more uncomfortable I felt. The smile didn't change. It didn't soften or fade like a normal expression would. It just stayed there, frozen. His stare felt intense, almost wild. My heart started to beat faster, and a thought crossed my mind that scared me more than I wanted to admit. Is he okay? I remember calling his name softly, almost without realizing it, but he didn't react. That's when I decided to step outside and see what was going on. I opened the door, expecting to find him sitting exactly where I had just seen him. But he wasn't there. Instead, I saw him sitting off to the left side, in his usual spot, looking down at his phone. He glanced up at me like nothing strange had happened at all. My stomach dropped. I asked him why he had moved, why he had been sitting right in front of the door. He looked confused and told me he hadn't been there. He said he'd been sitting where he was the entire time, scrolling on his phone. I stood there trying to make sense of it, replaying what I had just seen in my head. I laughed it off at first, telling myself I must have imagined it. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was late and I was tired. December nights can do strange things to shadows, especially when your mind is already half somewhere else. That's what I told myself, over and over until the uneasy feeling faded into the background. Life went on. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing else strange happened, and the memory slowly lost its sharp edge. It became one of those odd moments you think about once in a while but never dwell on too much. I convinced myself it was nothing. Then the second incident happened. This one was much more recent. It happened just yesterday, which is why I'm still shaken to my core. My husband and I had just returned home from a grocery trip. It was a normal day, nothing unusual about it. We parked the truck and I was focused on getting myself out, gathering my things and preparing to unload everything. As I stepped out of the truck, I glanced over and saw my husband leaning into the back, grabbing bags and moving things around. At least I thought it was him. What I saw was more like a shadow, a dark outline shaped exactly like him. The light wasn't great, but I could clearly tell it was his form. He was bent forward, rummaging through the groceries, shifting bags from one side to the other. I waited, watching him for a moment. He seemed to be taking a long time, longer than usual. He kept moving, but something about it felt slow and deliberate, like he was pretending to look for something. After a bit, I asked if he needed help. There was no answer. I called his name. Hayden. Still nothing. That's when a chill ran down my spine. I took a few steps closer and turned fully toward the truck. The moment my eyes focused, my heart nearly stopped. There was no one there. The shadow was gone. The truck was just sitting there, open and empty, groceries untouched. I stood frozen, trying to process what I had just seen. I knew what I saw. It wasn't a trick of the corner of my eye. It wasn't a quick glance or a fleeting shape. I had watched it move. I had spoken to it. Almost immediately after it disappeared, my husband came walking around the corner of the house. He was carrying grocery bags and looked completely normal, completely unaware of what had just happened. He told me he had already taken some things inside and was coming back out for the rest. I didn't know what to say. I felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. The fear this time was different. It was heavier, more real. This wasn't just a strange moment I could explain away with tired eyes or bad lighting. This was the second time I had seen something that looked exactly like my husband in a place where he wasn't. I told him what happened, my voice shaking as I tried to explain. He listened, but I could tell he didn't really know what to make of it. I don't blame him. If he had told me the same story, I'm not sure I would have believed it either. Since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Every little sound outside makes me tense. Every shadow feels deeper, darker, like it's hiding something. The only small comfort I have is that both times it happened outside. It was never inside the house. I keep telling myself that maybe whatever it is can't cross that boundary. Still, the thought doesn't fully calm me. I find myself watching the windows at night, making sure the curtains are closed. I double-check the locks, even though I know they won't help against something that doesn't follow normal rules. My mind keeps drifting to possibilities I don't want to consider. I don't know if it's a spirit, a shadow, or something else entirely. I don't know why it looks like my husband or why it chose those moments to appear. The idea that it might just be something bored, something playing with us, is terrifying in its own way. If it's playing, what happens when it gets tired of the game? I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I don't understand, something that doesn't care whether I'm scared or not. All I know is that this has changed the way I see my surroundings. The world feels thinner now, like there's less distance between what's real and what shouldn't be. I keep replaying those moments in my head, wondering if there was something I missed, some small detail that could explain it all. But every time I do, I end up with the same cold feeling in my chest. Whatever I saw knew how to look like him. It knew how he moves, how he stands, how he exists in space. That's what frightens me the most. It wasn't random, it wasn't vague, it was precise. And now, every time my husband steps outside, every time I see a shape move in the dark, I can't help but wonder if I'm really looking at him, or if it's going to happen again. I've never told this story to anyone in real life. Not my parents, not my close friends, not even people I trust completely. For 3 years, I've carried it around in my head, replaying the details over and over, trying to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt in the moment. But no matter how much time passes, the memory doesn't fade. If anything, it feels sharper now, clearer. And the question that still keeps me awake some nights is simple but terrifying. Was that man in the field just watching us? Or was he waiting for something worse to happen? This happened about 3 years ago. At the time, I didn't know what to do or who to talk to. I was in shock, and the 2 friends who were with me felt the same way. So we made an unspoken decision to keep it to ourselves. We never said it out loud, but we all understood that telling people would only make things more complicated. Questions we couldn't answer, reactions we didn't want to deal with, so we stayed quiet. The friends I was with that night, I'll call them Zach and Jake. We were all around the same age, just out of high school, in that phase of life where boredom can feel unbearable and bad ideas seem exciting instead of dangerous. One random afternoon, with nothing going on and too much free time, we decided to throw a party at Zach's house over the weekend. Zach's place was perfect for it. His house was big, much bigger than most in the area. The backyard was huge, with a pool and plenty of space for people to hang out. Even better, his parents were going to be out of town that weekend. It also happened to be the weekend right before spring break, which meant everyone was already in the mood to celebrate. The plan came together fast, mostly through texts and word of mouth. When the day finally came, the 3 of us met up at Zach's house hours before anyone else arrived. We cleaned up, set things out, moved furniture, and got the backyard ready. As the sun went down, people started showing up. By the time it was fully dark, there had to be around 80 people there, maybe more. Music was playing, people were drinking, laughing, talking, moving in and out of the house and backyard. It felt like a normal party, loud, messy, chaotic in the way parties usually are. Nothing about the night felt strange or threatening at first. If anything, it felt carefree. Around 1:30 in the morning, people started leaving. One by one, cars pulled away, voices faded, and the house slowly grew quieter. By that point, most of the guests were gone, but me, Zach, and Jake were still wide awake. We had energy to burn and no desire to go to sleep yet. Zach's house sat at the very edge of the neighborhood. It was the last house on the street. Behind his backyard, past the fence, was nothing but a massive cornfield. It stretched far into the distance, easily a mile or more. There were no houses behind it, no streetlights, no buildings, just rows and rows of corn disappearing into darkness. There was also a gate in Zach's backyard that opened directly into the field. Zach owned a Can-Am, an off-road vehicle. It had 2 seats, but someone could stand on the back if they wanted. Around 2 a.m., in our drunk and overconfident state, we decided it would be a great idea to take it out into the cornfield while blasting music. At the time, it didn't seem dangerous. It seemed fun, like something we'd laugh about later. I got into the driver's seat. Zach sat next to me and Jake climbed onto the back, holding on. We opened the gate, rolled into the field, and drove between the rows of corn, the headlights cutting narrow paths of light through the darkness. Music was playing loudly, the bass vibrating through the vehicle. We drove around like that for about 30 minutes. We made wide turns, laughed, shouted over the music. Eventually, the novelty wore off, and we decided to head back. But before doing that, we agreed to take one last turn through the field. About halfway through that final pass, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a man appeared in front of us. He was standing between the rows of corn, directly in our path. I slammed the brakes just enough to slow down, but didn't stop completely. In the headlights, I could see him clearly enough to make out details, even though it was pitch black everywhere else. He looked old, around 60, maybe older. He had gray hair and was wearing a vest. In his hands, he was holding a hunting rifle with a scope. The way he stood was calm, too calm. He wasn't startled. He didn't step back. He just stood there watching us approach. For a split second, our eyes met. I felt a jolt of fear run through me, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your chest tighten all at once. I didn't stop the Can-Am. I didn't say anything. I just drove past him, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. None of us spoke as we passed him. The music was still playing, but it felt distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. About 500 feet later, without warning, the Can-Am shut off. The engine died completely. The keys were still in the ignition. Nothing had been touched. It just stopped. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. We were still close enough that the man could probably see us, maybe hear us. I turned my head slowly and looked back toward where we had seen him standing. He was gone. The spot where he had been was empty, just rows of corn and darkness. That somehow made it worse. I didn't know which was more terrifying, seeing him there or realizing he could disappear so quickly. A few seconds passed. They felt like minutes. No one said a word. Finally, the Can-Am turned back on as if nothing had happened. I didn't question it. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight back toward the house, not looking back again. When we got back to the yard, we stopped near the house to catch our breath. My hands were still shaking. My mouth was dry. We tried to process what had just happened, speaking in short, confused sentences. That's when we heard it. A loud bang echoed through the night. Something metal slammed into the Can-Am. We froze. Before any of us could react, there was another sharp sound, a crack that rang out through the air. Something whizzed past us, close enough that I could hear it. Gunshots. There was no doubt about it. Someone was shooting at us. Panic took over. We jumped back onto the Can-Am and sped toward the house. We drove straight through the backyard, parked without caring where it ended up, and ran inside. We locked every door, every window. We turned off every light inside and outside the house, plunging everything into darkness. Zach had security cameras set up around the house. We went into the room where the monitors were and watched the screens in silence. My heart was still pounding so hard it hurt. A short time later, we saw a car. It drove slowly through the area behind the house and came to a stop. Its headlights stayed on, shining directly toward the backyard. The engine idled. No one got out. It just sat there. We didn't recognize the car. It stayed there for about 15 minutes. 15 of the longest minutes of my life. We barely breathed. We were afraid that any sound might somehow be heard, even though we were inside. Eventually, the car drove away. None of us slept that night. We stayed up until morning, watching the cameras jumping at every noise. What scared us the most wasn't just what happened, but trying to understand it. Why would an elderly man be standing in the middle of a cornfield at 2:30 in the morning holding a rifle? How did a car end up so close to the house shortly after the shots were fired? Was it the same man? Someone else? Were they together? The next morning, when the sun was up, things didn't feel any better. We checked Google Maps trying to figure out where the man could have come from. There were no houses nearby, no barns, no shelters, nothing. That meant one of two things. Either he was staying out there, or he had been watching us the entire time during the party. We never told our parents. We never called the police. Looking back, I don't know why. Fear, maybe, or the feeling that no one would believe us. 3 years have passed since then. We've all gone our separate ways. We don't talk much anymore, but that night never left me. Every time I hear a noise outside late at night, I think about the cornfield, about the headlights, about the man who appeared out of the dark and vanished just as quickly. And I still don't know what scares me more, the idea that he was just watching, or the possibility that we got away before he decided to do something worse. I have never really talked about this experience in detail, even though it is one of the earliest and most frightening things that ever happened to me. I was very young at the time, somewhere between 4 and 7 years old, and because of my age, many people might say it was just imagination or childhood fear. But even now, as an adult, the memories feel too clear, too sharp, to be dismissed so easily. What I experienced left a mark on me, and it shaped the way I see the world, reality, and the things that may exist beyond what we can easily explain. Back then, we lived in the southern part of the Philippines. The house we stayed in was big and old, the kind of place where even quiet footsteps seemed loud. Every sound echoed. Doors creaked, floors groaned, and at night the silence felt heavy, like the walls themselves were listening. It was not a modern house. It had history in it, though I didn't understand that at the time. I just knew that it felt different from other homes I had been to. My mother worked far away in another part of the country. She could only come home once every 6 months, sometimes even less. Because of that, I spent most of my time alone with my nanny. She took care of me, fed me, played with me, and slept in the house with me. Still, despite her presence, the house often felt empty. Too empty for a place that big. The first strange experience didn't happen while I was awake. It came to me in a dream. In the dream, there was a festival in our district. The Philippines is a deeply religious country, and festivals like this are very common. People celebrate saints, religious figures, and important events with parades, music, and statues. In my dream, people were walking through the streets carrying wooden statues of the young Jesus Christ. Everything looked familiar on the surface, but the feeling of the dream was wrong. It didn't feel joyful or peaceful. There was something dark underneath it all. As the parade passed by, I noticed one statue in particular. It was being carried carefully, almost proudly. Suddenly, its head turned toward me. Statues aren't supposed to move, but in the dream, it did. It looked straight at me, and its face changed. What was once calm and innocent became twisted. It smiled, but the smile was filled with anger, not playful or mischievous, but hostile. I felt like it hated me for looking at it. I woke up screaming. My body was soaked in sweat, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I was crying uncontrollably and shaking. I refused to go back to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I would see that face again. I ended up being taken to the hospital and stayed there for 2 days. At that age, I didn't fully understand what was happening. I just knew that the dream felt too real, like it wasn't just something my mind had made up. A few weeks passed and life returned to something close to normal. I went back to playing, watching cartoons, and following my nanny around the house. I tried to forget about the dream. Then the second incident happened. My nanny was changing the sheets in the master bedroom. That room was larger than the others and belonged to my mother. The bed faced the door, and beside it was a dressing table with a large mirror. Under that table was an open space meant for a chair. See, it was wide and tall enough for an adult to crawl under if they wanted to. I stood in the doorway watching my nanny work. She fixed the left side of the bed, then walked around to the right side. When she bent down to tuck in the sheets, something happened that my mind still struggles to accept. Someone stood up from under the dressing table. At first, my brain didn't understand what I was seeing. The figure looked like a person, but its skin was dark and uneven, as if it had been burned badly. Parts of it looked cracked, like charcoal. It wasn't smoking or glowing, it just looked damaged, like flesh that had been exposed to extreme heat. The strangest part was how normal it acted. It didn't look at me. It didn't acknowledge my presence at all. Instead, it reached out and helped my nanny fix the sheets on the bed, as if this was a normal, everyday task. My nanny didn't scream. She didn't react the way you would expect if she saw something like that. She just continued what she was doing. I called out to her, terrified, trying to tell her that someone else was there. She told me to stop joking, but I could hear nervousness in her voice. I could see it in the way her movements became stiff. She knew something wasn't right, even if she refused to admit it. After a few minutes, the burned figure kneeled back down and disappeared under the dressing table as quietly as it had appeared. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't very tall. At the time, it seemed big because I was so small. But compared to my adult height now, it was probably shorter than me. The next encounter happened in the living room. I was watching cartoons on the television while playing with my toys on the floor. The room felt normal, bright, noisy, familiar. One of my toys rolled under the sofa. Without thinking, I bent down to grab it. That's when I saw it again. It was closer this time. I only saw its back, but I recognized it immediately. The same burned skin, the same shape. My entire body froze. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. Fear locked me in place for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. Then instinct took over. I ran. I left the television on, toys scattered everywhere, and bolted straight to my nanny. I clung to her, crying, unable to properly explain what I had seen. The last encounter was the worst of all. I had invited 2 friends over to play. We spent hours playing board games and video games. Eventually, we got bored and decided to play hide and seek. One friend was chosen to count. Another hid under a table. I chose to hide under the bed in the master bedroom. The same bed, the same room. I must have fallen asleep for a short moment. I don't know how long. When I woke up, I immediately knew something was wrong. The air felt heavier, thicker, like it was harder to breathe. Slowly, I turned my head. The burned figure was there with me under the bed. It was staring straight at me. Up close, the details were horrifying. Its skin was black and peeling. In some places, I could see red flesh underneath. It had no eyelids. At the time, I didn't understand why. Now I realize it was because the skin had burned away. I could see veins on the side of its head. It had no hair at all. It reminded me of Gollum, but more human. Too human. And unlike a movie or a dream, this felt real, solid, present. I don't remember screaming. I think I passed out. The next thing I remember is waking up in my own bed. That was the last time I ever saw it directly. After that, strange things still happened in the house. A woman walking past the window that no neighbors could see. Shadows moving where nothing should be casting them. Quiet moments where I felt watched. Eventually, we moved out of that house. I grew older. Life went on. People sometimes ask me if I believe in ghosts. I always say yes. Not because I want to believe, but because I've seen enough to know there are things we don't understand yet. Science may explain them someday, but until then, I carry these memories with me, knowing that reality is much larger and much stranger than most of us are ready to accept.